Hey everyone, so this is a tutorial about getting clean drum tracks in WAV format out of Drum Machine Designer in Logic Pro 10 10.5. I've been finishing a bunch of songs lately and having used Drum Machine Designer, I love the plugin, it's really good, it's really handy, but getting individual WAV tracks out for an engineer is a little bit more complicated than I anticipated, and I didn't find any great resources online about this, so I'm hoping to share the knowledge around a little bit and help people finish some tracks nice and quick. So before we start doing anything, let's have a quick listen to the tune and assess the lay of the land. So as you can see, we've got a few elements. We've got a synth bass, we've got a pad, we've got a lead, and we've got this drum track. And on the drum track, on our master Drum Machine Designer track, we've got a bunch of MIDI notes, and we've got a kick, we've got some snares, some hats, typical of what you might use when you're programming your drums using the piano roll, or if you're banging them in using your MIDI keyboard. But we want these to be individual MIDI regions, and so these drums belong on individual MIDI regions, so we can get individual wave tracks out. So before we start to do anything to get those out, we need to save a project alternative. So if we go to File and then into Project Alternatives, we can choose New Alternative. Now, I don't need to do this now because I've already done this, but before we do anything slightly destructive in Logic, just to save ourselves the potential headache down the track if we mess something up, we might never be able to get back to the vibe that we loved the first time we put a track together. So saving an alternative means it's like a safe state of the project. Once we start deleting things and shuffling things around, it's really reassuring to know that we can jump back into an alternative that we saved earlier in the life of the project, and we can go back and fix some drums if we have to, or we can go back and adjust something if something goes wrong. Now, one of the next things we want to check before we start exporting our individual wave tracks out of Drum Machine Designer is we want to make sure that our individual quick sampler tracks, so basically the Drum Machine Designer is a stack of individual quick sampler instances, and I found that by default that those tend to be stereo Drum Machine Designer instances, and that's no good for drum samples because generally they're mono samples, and our kick and our snare, they're going to be right down the middle of the track generally, and we want those to be mono. So the easiest way to do that is we're just going to highlight all those tracks with drag, and then we're going to go into mono there. In this instance, they're already mono in this project. Is this one mono? Yes, it is. And this stack basically triggers a bunch of individual quick sampler instances in your project. And basically we need to get it down to just those quick sampler instances from the project rather than the track stack format, which doesn't actually give us individual outs. It gives us one stereo stem out, which is no good. You want your mixing engineers to have the full control with an individual track. So that's what we're going to achieve. So one final thing that we're going to do before we actually break this MIDI region out into individual MIDI regions is to just check the volume levels of each quick sampler instance in our stack. This is a tedious process, but it's super important. So one tip that I found out recently is we want to choose pre-fader metering. And basically that means that whatever we do on the fader in our track, it won't affect the meter readout we see in the mixer window. We want to make sure that our levels are peaking at around -12 dB, but we want to be able to adjust that here and not have the fader affect that. So let's roll that. Whatever we do on here, it sounds different, but it doesn't affect the actual meter readout. And we can see what's happening using the green text there. And we adjust the volume of our track using the volume settings in the plugins themselves. Let's actually just solo this. Right, and so basically we've got a couple of samples there. I think it's 5 or 6 samples that we're using, and we want to break them down. So we're going to right click and separate by note pitches here, but that's only there because it's been used recently by me. So if we go into MIDI, we can separate by note pitch there. So as you can see, we've broken this down now into individual MIDI regions for each drum track. So let's play this again. And you can see it sounds the same as before, which is exactly what we want. So now we need to flatten this stack. So what we need to do is we need to go to right-click menu and choose Flatten Stack, or I think we can do that from here. Flatten Stack is available from the track menu. And what that does is that actually gets rid of the master track. So there's no longer a master track with a drum machine designer on it. We've just got 6 individual quick sampler instances, and they've all got their individual MIDI regions. So let's play that out. Super cool. So one of the reasons that we want to get rid of that master track is, in my experience and in my testing, that if we were to run a bulk export and export every track individually to a WAV file, we would be left with an empty track called drums or drum machine designer. And that's no good because that looks a little unprofessional. It's a bit sloppy. You've got to go in and delete that track manually. You want to get this process down and refine it because hopefully you can be finishing lots of songs and you want to make sure that your process is as refined as possible. Now's a really good time also to go in. We don't have any in this instance, but if you had a template or you had used a preset with a dozen different samples and you didn't use a tambourine or you didn't use a particular sound effect, now's a good time to click on the track and delete those tracks because you don't want to have unnecessary WAV files coming out that are empty. Logic will do their best to get rid of those as well. But it also just keeps your project a bit cleaner. You don't want to be seeing things and sorting through things and tidying things up. If the track doesn't need to be there, get rid of the track. It also saves a bit of CPU overhead as well. Now, the last step of the process is we want to get each of these files out to WAV, and we're going to do that by File, Export, and then All Tracks as Audio Files. Basically, we can choose the range of what part of the project we want to export. In this instance, we're going to use cycle range because I've set up a loop region for just the parts of the song we're interested in. We're going to use WAV audio files, and the bit depth is going to be set to 24. So these settings, they can be a bit nerdy. Worth doing some research on your own about this sort of settings. Is not really in the scope of this video. In this, we're going to set normalize to off. Basically, we've done a little bit of normalization in advance when we've set our levels correctly, and basically the file format for each individual track, we can see an example 01-click. The 01 is really handy because the engineer will be able to sort those in order and then drop them into Pro Tools or drop them into Logic when they do their mix, and it will be sorted in a logical way. So we can save a little bit of effort and save a little bit of time of the engineer. So let's now export that. And now we've got a folder and we've got our tracks that we were working on in our project that we had just closed up. And the idea here is we're going to load these tracks into an empty Logic Pro 10 project. And this gives us a chance to check and make sure everything's okay and everything's working all right. So we're just going to drop these in. So now we see this window here. We're going to choose Create New Tracks, and all selected files are stems from one project. That seems to be the settings that work for me nicely. And we've added those in. So we no longer need this track. We can delete this old audio track. And we've got the stems from our previous project. Now let's have a quick listen to that. And we can hear the kick on its own. And we'll hear some effects snares coming up. And there's our backbeat. So as you can see, we've broken everything out. It sounds nice and clean. It sounds the same as what we were hearing when we were in the previous project in the production. These tracks are ready to go to an engineer. They're ready to be compressed, EQ'd, ready for reverb to be added, and everything's ready to go now for our tracks to sound the best they can. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Hopefully you got something out of this, and this will help you finish your tracks cleaner, streamline your workflow a little bit, and get your tracks sounding as good as possible.